Okay. So, apologies. This video should have been up on Twitch on Friday and on YouTube yesterday, which is Sunday. Reason why it didn't happen was that I was planning to record Don't Starve Together and put it up, and things went bad. So, it looks like I have to become more involved in recording Don't Starve Together, which I cannot afford to do at this time and for a while. So if there are any Don't Starve Together fans, I do apologize. It's because I am a graduate student. So that means that I have, like, we're close to finals. Ooh, excuse me. We're close to finals. It'll be next week. And then I had to look, and speaking of finals, I have 4 15-page papers to write. So that's, yeah, there's not going to be a Don't Starve Together video. And then also I will be beginning the process of writing my thesis. And since this video is for kids, a thesis, kiddos, is a very long paper. It takes about a year to write. Truthfully, you could write shorter, finish it up a lot more quickly. But it's very, very long paper. It's about anywhere from 20 to 30 pages, but you can actually write longer than that. But yeah. So I'm going to be doing that for the summer, fall, and spring. So the best thing to do is just read. But I actually appreciate, I lost my train of thought here. Getting back to my train of thought. So I have noticed that it seems that there is slight popularity with the first reading video that I have on YouTube. Which is great because people don't seem to care about reading on Twitch. So yeah, that's everything updated for now. So let's get into more of Password to Larkspur Lane. So last time, let's see, I'm not remembering everything in order, but Nancy was pushed off the curb. Or no, she was pushed off the sidewalk. And was rescued. She got nearly attacked by a dog. The dog hit this table of flowers and was like, eek! And ran away. Because dogs don't like things falling on them. Let's see what else. In the beginning, she finds a pigeon, this mysterious pigeon with a mysterious message. With, I think something about bluebells in that message. But definitely the last time, the very last thing that happened at the end of chapter 5 is that there was this blue circle of fire. It's a blue circle of fire. How do you make blue fire? I want to know. But anyway, so yeah, Nancy visited her friend Helen Archer. Not Helen Corning, Helen Archer. I have to remember, Helen's married now. Yeah, to recap, Nancy visits Helen's grandparents' place, and Helen, Nancy, and Jim, that's Helen's husband, go out to investigate this blue circle of fire. So that's everything for now. Let us get on to chapter 6. Chapter 6. Mysterious Morgan. Helen sees Nancy's arm as the eerie blue circle of fire moved toward them through the woods. Nancy squeezed her friend's hand reassuringly, though she herself was not certain that the ring meant harm to them. Closer and closer it came. Suddenly, Helen could stand the suspense no longer and gave a shrill scream. Instantly, the circle vanished. That's all in Instantly, the circle vanishes, all in italics, by the way. Just want to note that. Nancy darted to the place it had been, but now nothing was there. She tried to peer through the darkness, but the night seemed blacker than ever. At the same time, she could hear Jim shouting for Helen and running toward them. "What's the matter?" he panted. "That weird fire was coming at us," said Helen. "I lost my head and screamed. I'm sorry, Nancy," she added. "It spoiled your chance to find out what the thing was." "Never mind, I'll see it again, I'm sure." Knowing Nancy, this is definitely true. Back in the house, the Cornings met the three with a flood of anxious questions. They had heard Helen scream and were badly shaken. Quietly, Nancy explained what had happened. "I'll ring for Morgan," said Helen's grandmother. "I think we could all do with a cup of tea to settle our nerves." She pushed a button on the low table beside her. 5 minutes later, the houseman had not yet appeared. "I'll go for him, Gram," Jim offered, but returned to report that he could not find the servant. "I looked everywhere, including his room." "Perhaps he went outside to investigate the blue fire," Nancy suggested. "I think we ought to search the woods for him." "I went out and called," said Jim, "but got no answer." The elder Cornings exchanged worried glances. "Never mind, Gram," said Helen. "I'll make the tea. You tell Nancy the rest of the story." "It was 2 weeks ago," said Mrs. Corning, "that we first saw the circle of fire, and it was exactly 2 weeks ago that Morgan changed." "How do you mean?" Nancy asked. "He used to be such a cheerful fellow," she replied, "always ready with a little joke. Nothing we asked was ever too much trouble. I can't tell you what a tower of strength he has been. Over the years he has become like a member of the family, but now he's a stranger." "He forgets things," said Mr. Corning. "Sometimes we ring and he doesn't come. Afterward he mumbles a flimsy excuse." "Several times I heard noises at night on the first floor," said Mrs. Corning. "I came down and found Morgan wandering around, fully dressed, with a strange frightened look on his face. We've asked him a number of times to tell us what's the matter, but he avoids answering." "How long have you known him?" Nancy asked. 15 years, replied her host. "He came to us with excellent references, and now I don't know what we would do without him." "Perhaps he needs medical help," Nancy suggested. "Maybe he does," said Mrs. Corning, "but I feel sure the reason for his trouble is the blue fire." She arose, went to a modern-looking desk, and returned with an envelope. From it she took a folded card. "On the morning of the day the fire first appeared," said Mrs. Corning, "a letter came in the mail from Morgan. A little later, when I went to the kitchen, he was sitting in a chair, very pale, with his hand on his heart. The open envelope was on the table, but the card had dropped to the floor. As I picked it up, I couldn't help noticing it was an ordinary greeting card." "Did you see a signature?" Nancy asked. Helen's grandmother shook her head. Mr. Corning explained that they had called a doctor, who said Morgan had suffered a bad shock, but the houseman would answer no questions. "That afternoon," Mrs. Corning went on, "I called a taxi and went to the little shopping center across the lake. I found a duplicate of the card there. I wanted to get a close look at it." She handed the card to Nancy. On the front of the card was the picture of an attractive cottage with the door wide open. Above it were the words, "Open the way to friendship." The inside was blank. "Did you see any marks on the original?" "None. It was exactly like this one. Just an innocent card." "Not so innocent, I'm afraid," said Nancy. "It had no signature, and that makes me think the card was a message from someone Morgan knows and probably fears. Have you reported any of these happenings to the police?" Mr. Corning sighed. "We discussed doing so, but Morgan begged us not to. I thought he might have another attack if we did. No, Nancy, we'd like to get to the bottom of the matter quietly." Helen returned with the tea wagon. As Mrs. Corning poured, she suggested that the young people stay overnight. "To tell the truth, we feel better with you here." They agreed, and Nancy went to call her father. Before retiring, she asked, "Have any of the lake residents seen the blue fire?" "There's only one other house near ours," Mr. Corning replied, "but it's empty. Folks across the lake don't bother about what goes on here." Jim spoke up. "Graham said Morgan often disappears for a while after the blue fire is seen. He probably spots it from his room, which is at the end of the house and faces the lake." "I imagine he's back by now," said Mrs. Corning. "I'll check after I show you to your rooms." She led the three guests into the hall and up a spiral staircase. Nancy was given a room which had a full view of the lake. "There are several pairs of new pajamas in the dresser," Mrs. Corning told her. "Help yourself." Nancy waited until her hostess had checked on Morgan. He had not returned. Dun, dun, dun! As the young sleuth got ready for bed, she wondered where the mysterious houseman had gone. In the morning, when she followed Helen and Jim to the dining room, Nancy found Mrs. Corning setting the table while her husband watched white-faced from a chair. Morgan was still missing. I'm not doing the dun-dun-dun again. "His bed hasn't been slept in," said... I mistook that line. It's actually Helen's grandmother who's saying that, not Helen. Let me correct myself. "His bed hasn't been slept in," said Helen's grandmother, "and our car hasn't been used." "He might be lying hurt in the woods," Nancy suggested. "We'd better search." The three young people hurried toward the front door, but as Jim reached to open it, Nancy exclaimed, "Wait!" Sticking out from under the door was a piece of white paper. She picked up the paper and unfolded it. It contained a message written in pencil. Nancy read it aloud. Excuse me. "Don't worry about me. Have to be away for a while. Don't call police. We'll explain later." It was signed Morgan. "He must have slipped this under the door late last night," said Nancy. The three returned to the dining room, and Nancy showed the note to Mrs. Corning. "Yes," she said, "that is Morgan's handwriting." "Gramp, I think you should call the police," said Helen. Her grandfather shook his head. "For the present, we'll do as Morgan asks." "Of course, we can get along without him for a day or two," said Mrs. Corning, "but I feel safer if someone were here at night." "I wish I could be here," said Helen, "but—" No, her grandmother said firmly. "Your place is with your husband." "Perhaps Nancy could stay," Helen suggested. "Would you?" she asked her friend. "Thank you for putting me on the spot, Helen." That's what Nancy should say. But Nancy's just too nice. Plus, she wants to figure out the mystery, so of course she'll stay. It's like, dag-nabbit. You know? I want to know what Jim and Helen are doing that they both couldn't stay for a little bit. Is that even explained? I don't think it's explained. Like, what? Is that explained? I don't think it is explained. I think this is just, it's just going to make it convenient for Nancy to stay, so that way she can solve the mystery, because Nancy is a queen of convenience, okay? Things just happen in the right order for her to solve the mystery. Of course, she has to struggle throughout the story to figure out the mystery. And when I say mystery, more of like Nancy getting all the evidence and clues together, because there are times that she understands what's going on, but she doesn't have the evidence to prove what's going on. So it still takes the entire story to get to that point. But yeah, Nancy's the queen of convenience. "I'd love to," said Nancy, "but you know I'm also working on another case." Mrs. Cornick smiled. "This could be your headquarters for both." Suddenly she frowned. "But I don't like to think of you working on this case alone. It might be dangerous." "Maybe Bess and George could come," Helen said eagerly. "You three could have lots of fun here when you're not working on your mysteries." "I'll see what Dad says," Nancy promised. "Anyway, I'll come back tonight. I'd like another chance to catch whoever's responsible for that ring of blue fire." So this is just setting up Bess, Nancy, and George for this mystery. It really is. You're not slick. Who did write this book? The title says Carolyn Keene, but that's actually a pen name. Multiple authors contributed to the Nancy Drew series. I know Benson. That's her last name, but Benson definitely is significant to the Nancy Drew series, but I'm not sure who wrote number 10. I'll have to look that up later. Anyway, back to the story. After breakfast, she walked down the hill to where she and Helen had seen the strange phenomenon the night before. Here and there she found singed twigs and leaves, but had no time to look for other clues. Jim was waiting with the car. When Nancy entered her own house a little later, she found Effie whistling cheerfully in the kitchen. Her hair was topped by a pink bow. "Oh, hello, Nancy! Your father's gone already, but he said to tell you he'd see you tonight. Your friend Bess called. She and George are back. They want you to phone them right away. See what I mean? Nancy is the gosh darn queen of convenience. Like, as soon as she comes back, hey, Bess and George called. Well, actually, no, just Bess. Hey, Bess called. Just then, the back doorbell rang. Nancy turned to see a small boy outside the screen. Outside the screen. "Hello, Johnny," she said, walking over to him. "Hi, Nancy," he said. "What's in that box in your backyard?" Effie cut in quickly. "A pigeon, and don't you touch it." The girl explained to Nancy that she had taken the pigeon's box from the garage and placed it in the yard. "I put on a..." Okay, that's a typo. This next part's supposed to be in quotations. But anyway. "I put on a lid with holes in it. Now you can get air and a little sunlight." "I peeped through a hole," said Johnny, "and I saw something move. Is it a bird? I like birds. My mommy has a parakeet. Oh, Nancy, can I have some cookies?" Nancy laughed and gave him the last one in the jar. "That's all." "It's okay. I'll go play with your bird." "No, no," Nancy said quickly. "Leave the bird alone. I don't want it to fly away." The telephone rang and Nancy went to answer it. The caller wanted the library. "I'm sorry," Nancy said. "You have the wrong..." She broke off as Effie's shrill cry sounded from the kitchen. "Help, Nancy! The bird is loose!" With a gasp of alarm, Nancy hung up the phone and dashed for the kitchen. Effie was standing at the back doors, wringing her hands. Outside, Johnny was squatting beside the box, holding the lid in his hand. The pigeon was looking over the edge. "Johnny." I turned this page. "Johnny, you brat." I am told. Johnny needs a timeout. I'm just going to say it this way. Johnny needs a timeout. He needs one. Moving on. "Don't move, Johnny," Nancy called, and hurried out with Effie behind her. "He wants to fly," the little boy said. "He flaps his wings like anything, see?" The bewildered bird hopped to the edge of the box and sat there, balancing and stretching. Stay still, Nancy. Stay still, Johnny," Nancy warned. "Don't frighten it." "He isn't scared of me," the boy answered confidently. "He likes me, see?" Johnny's chubby little hand swooped toward the bird. Alarmed, the pigeon flapped its wings, rose awkwardly into the air, and landed just out of reach on a kitchen windowsill. "Oh dear," said Nancy, hardly daring to breathe. "We must get it down." Effie was already dragging a light lawn chair to the window. "I'll get him for you." "Wait, that won't hold you." Before Nancy could stop her, Effie leaped onto the chair seat and reached for the sill. Nancy grabbed for the chair. Too late. It tipped. With a wild cry, Effie toppled off, her arms flailing. The frightened bird flew away. "I blame Johnny. Darn you, Johnny! You don't come into somebody's yard and open a box with a gosh darn pigeon in it. You asked permission. They told you to not touch the gosh darn box, Johnny." Chapter 7. Unfriendly Keeper. "Effie, are you hurt?" Nancy cried. But even as she helped the girl to her feet, Nancy's anxious glance went to the bird flying across the yard. "I'm all right," Effie said breathlessly. "I'm sorry I scared him away. Oh, there he is." She pointed to the pigeon who had come to rest on the garage roof. Then, flying slowly and uncertainly, it flapped about in a circle and took off toward the front of the house. Nancy grabbed Effie's hand. "Come on!" She pulled Effie toward her car, which was parked near the front door. "I'll drive. You watch for the bird. We must follow it." Flustered, Effie climbed in beside Nancy, taking off her apron and chattering apologies. "Don't talk, just watch," Nancy said crisply. Effie, clutching her pink bow to keep it in place, gazed skyward. "There he goes!" The pigeon was flying low along the street in front of the house. Nancy started the motor and began to follow slowly. "I don't think this will work," Effie said, "because if we have to stay on the streets and the pigeon can fly in any direction." Maybe you're right, Nancy said grimly, but we're going to try. He's turning left, Effie announced. Quickly, Nancy turned left onto a side street and followed the bird until it veered again. Lucky he's flying low and slow, said Effie. Now and then the bird fluttered to a rest on a roof or tree branch, but the girls managed to track it until they had reached open country beyond the suburbs of River Heights. My neck is stiff from watching, Effie said with a sigh. Where is he going anyway? Home to its owner, Nancy replied. Where is it now? He went that way, said Effie, pointing across the field. But I can't see him because of those trees. Oh, we mustn't lose it, Nancy exclaimed. She stopped the car and scanned the sky. Effie gulped. I'm sorry, I can't see him. Oh, I could cry. Well, don't, Nancy commanded. That pigeon is one of my best clues. I must find it. See how snappy Nancy is? She's like, I need to find that pigeon! I still blame Johnny, though. This is going to be a hashtag, blame Johnny. Not that anybody could chat on it on YouTube. But, yeah, blame Johnny. Suddenly she spotted the large gray bird flying out of the clump of trees. There he goes, Nancy exclaimed. Luckily, the pigeon flew parallel to the road, and Nancy drove along behind it. Please watch the bird, Effie, Nancy implored as her companion looked away. I'm not even blinking both eyes at once, Effie assured her. I blink one eye at a time. After a mile, Effie suddenly pointed to a grove of elms that towered over the flat fields. Look, he's going round and round over those trees. I think he's dizzy. No, Nancy said, and felt a quiver of excitement. That's where it lives. I see buildings in the grove. A second later, the pigeon disappeared among the trees. Nancy halted the car beside a stone wall over which honeysuckle tumbled. A short distance ahead was a driveway. Listen, Effie, Nancy said firmly. We are going in there, and you are not to say a word about our keeping the pigeon or following it here. Effie's eyes were wide. Is there a gang of kidnappers in there? She asked timidly. I don't know who's there, Nancy replied, but we must be prepared for anything. Then, seeing that Effie was trembling, she said, Would you rather wait here? Oh, no, I don't want to stay alone, but maybe I could hide in the trunk. They got out of the car, and Effie scrambled into the luggage compartment. She left the lid open an inch so there would be fresh air. Nancy slipped behind the wheel again and turned off the little used sandy road onto a well-kept gravel driveway. It swept in a great curve toward a long, rambling white house. Nancy drove nearly a quarter of a mile. The path dipped under the trees, and Nancy saw that the house was a mansion. Whoever occupied it must be very wealthy. White columns supported the overhanging roof of a porte-cochere. It's French. Moving on. The young sleuth did not stop there, but headed toward the outbuildings to the far right of it. She pulled up in front of a stable. Quietly, Nancy got out of the car. Her sweeping glance took in a nearby shed and a large coop beside it containing a number of pigeons. On the roof rested the pigeon Nancy had been following. The yard was empty. Except for the cooing and fluttering of the birds, the place was silent. Was it deserted? Nancy wondered. Suddenly she was startled by a noise that sounded like a pistol shot. She whirled. In the shadow of the stable doorway stood a dark, thin-faced man wearing a riding habit. He carried a long, knotted leather whip, which he cracked again. With an unpleasant grin, he said, Scared you, didn't I? Keeping her voice cool and even, Nancy said, Good morning. Is the owner here? Nope, he said, studying her carefully. What do you want? I'd like to buy some pigeons, Nancy said. They'll be expensive, he said. Ours are specially trained to fly both day and night. Really? Pigeons can fly at night? I would think their eyesight would be bad at night. You know? Like, the only thing that could fly at night is that I can think of off the top of my head is an owl. How many birds you want? 2, Nancy replied. Do you take care of these all by yourself? She asked casually, hoping to get a lead on how many men worked at the place. Sure, he said. As he walked toward the coop, he spotted the pigeon on top of it. Oh, he exclaimed softly. So you finally got here. He hurried over and picked up the pigeon. The keeper looked it over curiously, then opened the capsule on the bird's leg. With sinking heart, Nancy remembered that the message was no longer there. She had intended to replace it before releasing the pigeon, but the bird's sudden escape had made this impossible. When the man saw that the capsule was empty, he bit his lip and frowned. After putting the pigeon into the coop, he turned and walked back to Nancy, his eyes narrowing. "It's a lovely house and grounds," she remarked innocently. "Who lives here?" "Kind of busy this morning," he said curtly. "What kind of birds you want?" "Any healthy pair will do," Nancy replied. While they had been talking, the man's eyes had roved over the convertible, and now he gazed at Nancy as if he were trying to make up his mind about something. Had he recognized her? Had Adam Thorne warned his accomplices to be on the lookout for her? Suddenly the man said, "Okay, I'll get you a pair. You pay inside the house." "Oh, no," Nancy thought. "I won't risk that. I think I'd better be ready to leave fast." This is her thinking all that stuff. As the pigeon keeper walked to the coop, Nancy got back into the car and started the motor. Instantly he turned and hurried back. "Hold it," he said sharply. "I think you'd better come with me and pick out your own birds." Nancy's heart began to thump. "No, thank you," she said coolly. "You can do it." "Get out!" the man snarled and swiftly seized Nancy's arm with one hand. He tossed away the whip and reached into the car to turn off the motor. Suddenly a weird sound came from the rear of the car. Effie! It sounded as if she was having an attack of hysterical giggles. Startled, the man let go of Nancy's arm. "What's that?" Instantly, Nancy released the brake and roared off in reverse. In a shower of gravel, she turned, then sped past the house and down the driveway. Fearing pursuit, she kept going for about 3 miles until she reached the small settlement of West Granby. Here the young detective turned into the parking area of an old-fashioned frame hotel. Quickly she got out and raised the trunk lid. "Okay, Effie, you can come out now." "Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry if I spoiled everything," said the red-faced girl as she jumped down. "When I heard that man order you to get out of the car, boy, was I scared. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was make a crazy laugh." Nancy smiled. "Never mind. Your giggles saved the day." "They definitely did. Thank you, Effie." To calm the excited girl, Nancy suggested that they have lunch in the hotel coffee shop. While waiting for their order, Nancy phoned a neighbor of the Drews and asked her to give Hannah Gruen some lunch and tell her that the girls would be home in an hour. Then Nancy questioned the hotel manager about the estate she had seen. "The owner's name is Adolphe Tucker," the man said, "and that's really all anybody knows about him. He lived there a year or so, but he keeps to himself." "Then he doesn't bother his neighbors?" The hotel manager scowled. "His plane does, though. Flying all hours of the day and night." "Plane?" Nancy repeated. "Little tan one with a flying horse or something on the I think Shroom told me how to pronounce this. Fuselage? Fuselage. Fuselage. So she had been right. The pigeon had been released from the plane. Nancy was quietly elated before she felt sure she had found the gang's hideout. But suddenly she remembered there were no Larkspur, and she had not seen a gate. The kidnappers must have 2 hideouts, Nancy decided. The pigeons and the plane are used for messages and transportation between them. When she and Effie reached home, they went at once to Hannah's room and told her about the pigeon incident. "You're having plenty of excitement, Nancy," the housekeeper sighed. "And here I am cooped up and no use at all." Nancy hugged her. "You've helped me so often you deserve a rest, and now I must call Bess and George." When Bess heard about the invitation to the Cornings, she gave a whoop of delight. "Guess what?" she said. "I just finished talking to Dave. He and Bert are going to that very lake as camp counselors. It happened suddenly when 3 old counselors dropped out. You'll probably hear from Ned soon. And now tell me more about the Cornings mystery." Okay, let me explain. Ned is Nancy's beau. B-E-A-U. So, they're not necessarily boyfriend and girlfriend at this point. They just like each other and hang around each other a lot. And so Bert and Dave are supposed to be his friends that get along with Bess and George. So, that's all the information you need to know in context. Moving on. Nancy related it briefly and then phoned George. "I'll be ready whenever you say, Nancy." Just before dinner that evening, Nancy made up a bouquet of flowers from her garden and took it to the neighbor who had given Hannah lunch. On the way back, she noticed a black sedan parked across from the Drew house. 2 men were seated in it with their hats pulled low. When they noticed her looking at them, the driver pulled away quickly. "I wonder who they are," she mused. Nancy unlocked the front door but could not push it open. She tried harder. It still stuck. What had happened during her absence? Effie! She called loudly through the crack. In a few seconds, an answer came. Okay, I'll open it. There was the sound of something heavy being dragged over the floor. Effie, pale and trembling, opened the door. I put the living room couch and a big chair here to keep those men out, she explained. Hold on. Effie did what? Effie is strong. What men? Nancy asked. The ones in the car across the street. They tried to force their way in here, but I slammed the door in their faces. Good for you, said Nancy, both alarmed and amused. Who were they? I don't know. I mean, Nancy, if she slammed the door in front of their faces, chances are she has no idea who the heck they are. Well, they've gone, Effie, so don't worry. Nancy herself was greatly concerned and peered from the window several times. The black sedan drove past every few minutes. It was not the one in which Dr. Spire had been kidnapped. Just before Mr. Drew arrived at dinner time, the car parked once more in front of a house a few doors away. Nancy mentioned it to her father and asked if the police should be notified. Not yet, the lawyer said. That would only scare them off. I want to find out what they're up to. I have an idea, said Nancy, and told him what had happened the night before and during the day. The keeper passed along the pigeon story, of course, so they know I've seen one of their hideouts, and they probably suspect I have the note that was in the capsule. I think they tried to force their way in here to intimidate me so that I wouldn't call the police, or to take revenge on me if I had. Mr. Drew frowned. Nancy, you are in great danger. You must get away, and secretly. Shall I go to the Cornings? Good idea. But how can I leave secretly, Dad? I have the solution to that problem, he replied. I'll give you my surprise present now. Again, Nancy, queen of convenience. This whole thing about these mysterious guys parked outside the Drew house sets it up that for Mr. Drew to willingly allow Nancy to move in with the Cornings for a short time. Well, she's just visiting, so it's not really moving, but see how things work out for Nancy? They just work out so brilliantly. Chapter 8. Over the Wall. A surprise, Nancy exclaimed. How could that keep these men from following me? Her father smiled. Can't you guess? Nancy's eyes suddenly sparkled. Oh, I think I know. Dad, you didn't. It isn't. The lawyer laughed. I did, and it is. Your new convertible is at Packland Motors. I was going to surprise you with it next week, but I'll have Mr. French bring the car around as soon as it's dark outside. Oh, Dad, how wonderful, said Nancy, hugging him. You're the most generous father. He definitely is, okay? I don't know too many dads who would be like, okay, honey, your car's messed up, so I'm going to trade in your old car for a new car. Now it works for Nancy Drew because she's not entitled or spoiled. It does not work for most other people. No, it doesn't. That's still sweet of him, but still, at the same time, wow. Wow. Your car gets dinged, you get a new car. After pause, she added, those men will be on the lookout for me in my old car, and I'll be spinning off in a shiny new one. Then Nancy became serious. I must leave here without their seeing me. You could have Mr. French bring the new car to the street behind our house. I'll sneak out the back way. That's what I thought, said Mr. Drew. While he called Packland Motors, Nancy hurried upstairs and told Hannah the news, then packed a suitcase for her visit at Sylvan Lake. After dinner, she called the Cornings to say she would be there later in the evening. Helen's grandmother was delighted. At 9 o'clock, both the doorbell and the telephone rang at once. As Mr. Drew headed for the door, Nancy picked up the phone. Bess was calling to say that the cousins would meet her at the lake the next day. Mother will drive us out. Sorry we can't leave now. That's okay. When Nancy entered the living room, a muscular young man was talking to her father. She recognized him as Henry Durkin, superintendent of the building where Mr. Drew had his law office. Henry's going to help us, Nancy, her father explained as she walked into the room. I called him while you were packing. Hannah can stay with her sister while you're away. Henry will drive her and Effie there after we've gone. Are you coming with me, Dad? Nancy asked, surprised. I certainly am, he said firmly. I'm taking no chances on your being alone if those men pick up your trail. After Henry takes Hannah and Effie, he will drive my car to the Cornings, pick me up, and take me to the airport. I have a conference in Chicago tomorrow and a reservation on the midnight plane. Henry Durkin frowned. Mr. Drew, if I were you, I'd call the cops. That'll be your job as soon as Nancy and I leave the house, the lawyer said. I don't want those men in the car disturbed until then. As long as they're parked on the street, we know where they are. Nancy, he added, as soon as I reach the airport, I'll call Lieutenant Mulligan and tell him about the Tucker estate. Now we must hurry. While Henry Durkin brought Nancy's bag downstairs, she rummaged in the back of her closet and found an old suitcase. She carried it to the hall below where her father was waiting. I have an idea, Dad. Suppose I take my old car out of the garage and park it at the curb. If Mr. Durkin carries this suitcase out and puts it in the luggage compartment, the men in the sedan will surely think I'm leaving in that car. Good, said Mr. Drew. He switched on the porch light. We'll make the front of the house as conspicuous as possible. And meanwhile, Nancy said with a smile, we'll slip out the back door. When her car was in place, she gave the empty bag to Henry. Carry that as if it's full and heavy, she said with a chuckle. As he went out the door, Nancy stepped out onto the porch and called loudly and clearly, Thanks a lot, Henry! Put it in the back! Then she went inside and followed her father to the unlighted kitchen. He was carrying her bag and his own. Together they stepped outdoors and peered into the darkness. They wondered uneasily if there were any unseen watchers. Quietly they felt their way toward the rear of the garden. Nancy was first to reach the high brick wall. With the help of the tough vines growing over it, she pulled herself to the top. Hand up the bags, she whispered. Mr. Drew did so and began to climb the wall. By now, Nancy's eyes had become accustomed to the darkness, and suddenly she saw a figure detach itself from the shadow of the garage and disappear down the driveway. Dad, she whispered, someone was watching. We must move fast then, he said, and dropped the bags to the ground in the adjoining backyard. Nancy leaped down, landing lightly a moment before her father. Mr. Drew grabbed the suitcases and they sped through the neighbor's yard and down the driveway to the sidewalk. At the curb stood a beautiful convertible. At the curb stood a beautiful convertible, its polished metal reflecting light from the street lamps several houses away. Despite their desperate hurry, Nancy felt a thrill of excitement. My new car, she whispered. As she reached it, a figure stepped from the shadows, and her heart pounded, but a second later she relaxed. Here are the keys, Mr. Drew, said a deep voice. Mr. French, exclaimed the lawyer as he tossed the two bags into the back seat. Many thanks. Sorry we're in such a rush. Nancy's old car is in front of our house. The keys are inside. Will you pick it up? Nancy can come tomorrow and change license plates. How beautiful this is, Nancy said. She slipped into the driver's seat and turned on the ignition. A deep purr came from the motor. At the same time, the young sleuth glanced into the rear-view mirror and saw headlights sweep around the corner. I think they're coming, she said. The next instant, her car was zipping forward. Nancy turned the corner and several more after that. Then she slid into a driveway and switched off the lights. A moment later, this black sedan raced down the street and disappeared in the distance. Its license plate was dangling, so she could not read the number. As Nancy gave a long sigh, Mr. Drew patted her hand. You certainly used your head that time. Yes, she did. Thanks, Dad. She enjoyed the drive to the lake, sensing the power of the new car. Finally, she said, I love my old car, Dad. It did a good job for me, but this one is just marvelous. Glad you're pleased, Nancy. You certainly handle it like a pro. At the lake, the Cornings welcomed the Drews cordially. Over cool drinks, the elderly couple reported that the housemen had not returned, nor had the circle of blue fire been seen that evening. We're still worried, their hostess said. Mr. Drew, it's kind of you to lend Nancy to us. He grinned appreciatively at the implied compliment. Presently, Henry Durkin arrived. Mr. Drew quickly said good night to the Cornings, kissed Nancy, cautioned her to be very careful, and left for the airport. Shortly afterward, Mrs. Corning went with Nancy to the room with twin beds that she had occupied the night before. Would you like your friends to be in here with you, Nancy? It would be nice. Then we'll put in a cot tomorrow morning. As Nancy unpacked, her thoughts turned to the missing servant. Since the fiery circle had not appeared after he vanished, possibly it had been a signal to Morgan to leave. But why? Did he go willingly? Nancy wondered. She hoped the next day would bring news of him, but there was no letter in the morning mail nor a phone call. Nancy was inclined to think he had not left of his own volition, but had been forced to go. Mrs. Corning looked through the letters. "I have one from Brent's department store," she said. "A dress I ordered has come in. I'd like to pick it up." Nancy quickly volunteered to take her to River Heights. "I must turn in the dealer's plates on my car and get my own," she said. "Also, I have an errand at the jeweler's." Helen's grandmother accepted the ride. While she was in Brent's, Nancy went to see if Mr. Stone had learned anything about the crest on the gold bracelet. I forget how I voiced this guy, but I'll try. "I was going to call you," the jeweler said, taking her into his office. "I heard from Abelard de Gaulset today." Mr. Stone handed Nancy a typewritten letter. "Read this. Dear Mr. Stone, the armorial bearings described in your letter are those of the Eldridge family, the crest dating back to Henry IV of England, and the quartering on the shield marking the union of the Eldridge house with the Garretts in 1604. At the time of the Louisiana Purchase, the New York branch of the family, consisting of Isaiah Eldridge, his wife Prudence, and 2 children, received a large grant of land in what is now Missouri. I presume that your descendants still live in or near St. Louis, although I have no records to prove that. Sincerely yours, Abelard de Gotha." "Does that help you in any way?" Mr. Stone asked. "Indeed it does," Nancy replied. "I'll try to reach any Eldridges in St. Louis." Nancy thanked the jeweler and hurried back to the car. Mrs. Corning joined her a few minutes later. After new plates had been put on the car, Nancy headed for the lake. When they reached it, she went upstairs to leave her purse. As she opened the bedroom door, there was a cry of, "Hi!" Bess and George rushed across the room and hugged her. "Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad to see you!" Bess exclaimed. George, with an affectionate grin, added, "You'd think we'd been separated for 2 years instead of 2 weeks." Bess was blonde, pretty, and somewhat plump. Her cousin George, a brunette with a short haircut and classic features, gave every indication of being a fine athlete. "Nancy, I'm just bursting to tell you something," said Bess. "No!" George protested quickly. "You promised not to breathe a word." Bess gave a great sigh. "I don't know which is harder, to keep on a diet or keep in a secret." Nancy laughed. "How long before you'll tell me?" "This afternoon," said George. "You'll see for yourself." "If I don't wither from curiosity first," Nancy said, chuckling. After lunch, Mrs. Corning insisted that the girls sit on the beach to exchange news and take a swim. Though Nancy would have preferred working on the St. Louis lead, she put her plans aside to please her hostess. Presently, the 3 visitors appeared in swimsuits and beach coats. Nancy's turquoise suit set off her smooth suntan perfectly, while Bess looked attractive in a butter yellow one. George was a trim contrast in sea green. "How pretty you all are," their hostess remarked. She led them down a back stairway, through the small utility room next to Morgan's bedroom, and out to the gravel driveway. "There's the way to the beach," she said, showing them a footpath which led into the woods. As the 3 girls started down the path, George asked, "Where did you see the blue fire?" Nancy pointed across the slope. Near that end of the house." "I hope I don't see it at all," muttered Bess. Before long, they came out on a flat, narrow bit of shoreline a short distance from a dock. A little girl of 5 was playing on the edge of it while 2 women sunned themselves in beach chairs above the waterfront. "Marie!" called one of the women. "Be careful!" Nancy and her friend sat down on the dock, enjoying the attractive scenery. A circling speedboat roared toward them. The girls realized that it was going to pass very close to the dock. Suddenly, little Marie jumped up to wave. "Marie Eldridge!" cried the same woman. "Come here!" Nancy was startled to hear the name Eldridge, but before she could question the child, Marie lost her balance and toppled into the water. Gosh darn it. It ain't a Nancy Drew book if a child's not in danger. The woman screamed, and her companion cried out, "The boat! It'll hit her!" Nancy had already leaped to the end of the dock. Without hesitation, she dived in after the child, directly in the path of the oncoming boat. Dun, dun, dun! Chapter 9. Surprises. But before we get into Chapter 9, what are the chances that the very people that Nancy are looking for, the very people that Nancy, is, people is a grouping. So it's people is. Okay. But anyway, what are the chances that the people that Nancy is looking for happen to be here in this location? I know it's R. I'm debating now. I'm questioning myself. Point is, Nancy's looking for people. They happen to be right at this current location, so she didn't even have to call anybody. Nancy is the queen. No, I should change it. She is the goddess of convenience. Like, these things just miraculously happen. But anyway, on to chapter 9. As Nancy hit the water, the prow of the speedboat loomed overhead. Swiftly, she put one arm around the floundering child and placed the palm of her hand over Marie's face. At the same time, Nancy plunged below. Down, down, down! The little girl squirmed, but Nancy held her firmly. Looking up through the green water, she saw the black keel of the speedboat whiz past in a froth of bubbles. Instantly, Nancy shot to the surface. Barely 30 seconds had elapsed, but it seemed like an eternity. Sunlight dazzled her eyes as the strong arms of Bess and George reached down and lifted the child to the dock. Marie, Nancy panted. Is she all right? She'll be okay, said George as the child began to cry. Marie swallowed some of the lake, that's all. By this time, the two women had rushed over. Mommy! Cried Marie. Mrs. Eldridge scooped up her small daughter and hugged her. My baby, the woman murmured. As she fondled the sobbing child, she looked at Nancy. How can I ever thank you? Please don't, Nancy replied softly. I'm so glad I was here. I want to do something for you, said the grateful woman. I live in the white cottage at the north end of the lake. Nancy smiled. Perhaps you can, Mrs. Eldridge. I would like to ask you something. Anything, the woman said warmly. Come sit down. She led the girls to the beach chairs and settled down comfortably with Marie on her lap. The little girl had stopped crying and cuddled up drowsily. The girls introduced themselves, and Nancy said, Tell me, are you from St. Louis? The woman looked amazed. Why, yes, I am. How did you know? I've heard that an Eldridge family settled in Missouri many years ago, said Nancy. They were originally from New York. That could have been my husband's people, the woman said, looking puzzled. What's the matter? She added quickly, for there was a strange half-smile on Nancy's face. I just can't believe it, Nancy said. This must be my lucky day. What do you mean? Mrs. Eldridge asked. A short time ago, Nancy began, under rather unusual circumstances, I came into possession of an old-fashioned gold bracelet with a coat of arms on it, which I traced. It belongs to the Eldridges. A gold bracelet, the woman exclaimed, her cheeks flushing. Was there an inscription on it? To my darling Mary, from Joe, Nancy replied. The woman grew pale. Where's the bracelet now? Safe in my house in River Heights, Nancy replied reassuringly. It must belong to my husband's Aunt Mary, Mrs. Eldridge exclaimed. How did you get it? As Nancy told the story, the woman listened intently, then said, I must call my husband at once. She explained that he was in Richmond, Virginia, searching for his aunt. She has been missing since early spring. Our aunt is a very wealthy woman, rather eccentric at times. Several months ago, she disappeared from her home, leaving a letter. It said that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and was going to a sanatorium for a long rest. Aunt Mary asked us not to try finding her. I'm sure she's being held not far from here, Nancy said. I, too, am trying to find her. And Nancy will, George declared. She and Bess told Mrs. Eldridge of their friend's success as an amateur detective. And I have to clarify what amateur means. Nancy is not a beginner as a detective. Amateur means that she is not, she's not getting paid for this. So she is a professional, but she is not a detective by profession. So that's why she's called an amateur detective. And there's a good reason why Nancy doesn't get paid for this, because she wants to help people. And if she has a price, then that's actually going to affect who can come to her and who can't. So she allows everything to be free. Because Nancy loves to help people. That's truly the best thing about Nancy Drew. Is no matter how much how much I joke and tease. What makes Nancy Drew so great is her willingness to help people, just her selfless desire. She's not a perfect character, but she definitely exemplifies everything that we should, as people, try to be. Um, Being generous, charitable, kind, and also willing to stand up for what's right, because Nancy comes across a lot of dangerous characters who would love nothing more to kill her. Um, Not all stories have someone trying to kill Nancy, but there are stories where there are people who would love nothing more, and which is interesting because a lot of the people that Nancy encounters, they're thieves in some kind of way. Nancy never really does deal with anyone outside of counterfeiters, um, kidnappers, and whatever else. Anything that regards to stealing. Nancy only deals with those people in the stories, but you do have people who try to kill her because there are people who are that ruthless. But so yeah, Nancy stands up for what's right, and that's just what makes her remarkable in these stories. Which is why it's definitely a problem when you try to have an adaptation on Nancy Drew books. Because they often forget the core of Nancy Drew, and that is that she loves to help people. She loves mysteries, and she loves investigating and all that stuff. But she loves helping people more. Like, she wanted to investigate where the Eldridges were, and instead she listens to Helen Corning's grandmother, Helen Archer's grandmother, and just hangs out at the beach because that's what her friend's grandmother wanted. That doesn't mean Nancy does everything somebody just tells her to do, but if it's not an unreasonable demand or suggestion, she'll like listen to it. So yeah, she likes people more than just solving mysteries. Mysteries just are the puzzles that she likes to put together. But when it comes to actually solving mysteries, she likes to help the people out of it. That's what truly gives her satisfaction. Anyway, Miss Drew has already done me one great service, Mrs. Eldridge said with a smile. She shifted this drowsy child to her shoulder and rose. I can never thank you enough, she said as she started to leave. Suddenly Mrs. Eldridge stopped and looked back. I forgot to tell you. Aunt Mary has a necklace which matches the bracelet. She wore the set almost constantly from the moment Uncle Joe gave it to her 60 years ago. I'm glad you told me, said Nancy. It may be a helpful clue. As Mrs. Eldridge walked away, Nancy said to her friends, This has been a day of surprises. George grinned. You haven't seen anything yet. She pointed out to the lake. Take a look at that. A long canoe with 3 young men was heading toward the shore. A shrill whistle split the air as one of them waved. Ned! exclaimed Nancy. And Bert and Dave, Bess added. That was our secret. The boys called us last night, said George. And when we told them we were coming here, they decided to paddle over today. Ned wanted to surprise you, Nancy. He certainly did, and it's a grand surprise, she said with a broad smile. The canoe I can't even speak. The canoe grated ashore, and the 3 athletic-looking boys jumped out. All wore dark blue Bermuda shorts with white shirts bearing the name Camp Hiawatha. Here we are, husky blonde Bert Elton exclaimed with a grin. The world's greatest camp counselors. He was George's special friend. Dave Evans was a rangy boy with fair hair and green eyes. Ned Nickerson, who was tall and handsome, grinned. Now with us at the lake, you girls can have some excitement. George and Bess burst into laughter, and even Nancy had a chuckle. Nancy's way ahead of you today, said George. She usually is, Ned remarked. Tell us about it. More mystery? 2 of them, said George, and a rescue. Walking up the hill to the Cornings' house, Nancy told the boys all that had happened, passing lightly over the speedboat episode. Ned gave a low whistle. You're on two dangerous cases, I'm afraid, Nancy. Don't forget you can... Bert. Don't forget you can count on us, Bert said as they entered the utility room. Through an open door straight ahead, they saw Mrs. Corning in the kitchen. She was happy to meet the boys and at once invited the three couples to the yacht club dance across the lake the next night. My husband and I belong and would love to have you go as our guests. I'm sure we can get time off from our camp duties, said Ned. We'll accept. Thank you. Presently, the boys said goodbye. We have to go back to our young charges, Dave remarked. See you tomorrow. The girls dressed quickly and helped their hostess prepare a dinner of steak, potatoes, green beans, and watermelon. It's not steak potatoes, it's steak and potatoes. Afterward, they insisted upon tidying the kitchen without her assistance. It was twilight by the time that they finished. Nancy excused herself and slipped out the front door. Carrying a flashlight, she headed for the spot in the woods where she and Helen had seen the blue fire. Excuse me. After examining the singed leaves, Nancy concentrated on the ground beneath them. There were some bits of scorched brown wrapping paper. Picking them up, she wondered if they might help to explain the fire display. Nancy then hurried to her room and put the pieces away in an envelope. Maybe Ned can analyze them, she said to herself. I'll check with him tomorrow night. Though the group watched intently, the blue fire did not appear that evening. Before going to bed, Nancy told the Cornings that she was afraid Morgan might have been kidnapped. Perhaps you ought to inform the police. Mr. Corning shook his head. Morgan asked us not to, he said. I'll give him another 36 hours. Mr. Corning? This man has been missing for was it at least 24 hours? Frickin' call the police! Next day, there was still no sign of the missing houseman, and Nancy asked for permission to search his room. Go right ahead, said Mrs. Corning. It was an attractive room with a large window overlooking the lake. Quickly and efficiently, Nancy searched, but could find no clue to the man's whereabouts. She observed that the servant could leave the house by going through the utility room and out the side door without anyone seeing him. Has he a key to the doors? Nancy asked Mrs. Corning. Well, yes. He usually came and went by the side door so he wouldn't bother us. Did he have many friends? Nancy inquired. None that we know of. He was a quiet man and liked to stay by himself. Nancy looked thoughtful. The friendship card Morgan received makes me feel that an old acquaintance is after him for some reason. There may be a clue to this person in his references. If you still have them, may I examine the letters? Mrs. Corning was not sure where the papers were. I'll look for them tomorrow. After lunch, Nancy, Bess, and George drove to the eastern outskirts of River Heights to search for the Larkspur house. They were riding along a shady country road. Nancy stopped in front of a small home where a woman was trimming the hedge. Under a nearby tree sat an old lady, shelling peas. Excuse me, said Nancy. We're trying to find a large house in this area that has lots of larkspur or bluebells around it. Do you know of such a place? Can't say I do, the woman replied. What'd she say? The old lady asked loudly. Nothing, Mother. Just some house I'm looking for. She's deaf, the woman added to Nancy. I heard that, the old mother said tartly. So she's not that deaf. And I heard house and bluebells. Go looking for the bluebell house, and I know just where it is. Dun, dun, dun! Unfortunately, I only have 2 more minutes, so I won't be able to really get through chapter 10. But we can definitely end right here. So far, we had a child fall off a dock and Nancy having to jump in the water. We also had another child who decided to release the pigeon from a box. Thankfully, the pigeon was nice enough to Nancy to not fly all over the place, so Nancy could actually follow it to this one hideout. But Nancy has also been able to learn more about the mysterious older woman who seems to be that she's being held captive. So there's all of that. Is there anything else I missed? There's quite a bit that happened. And Nancy has to go incognito because it looks like that she's being trailed. But we also finally have Bess and George and Ned. and Bert and Dave in the story. And we will see a lot of cameos of Ned throughout the books that I'm reading. I'm going to stop at book 24 when I finally get to it, because that's all the books I have. And then I will, at some point, go back through 1 through 9 as well. But, for the people on YouTube. But anyway, yeah, a lot of things have happened. So, to get back on track, though, I will have to, like, talk less. Right. Because I should have finished chapter 10. So, I should... next time we'll be reading all the way through chapter 15, or at least trying to. Daring Plans is that chapter. But anyway, this next chapter is called An Unwelcome Gift. But we have more to look forward to. We're going to figure out where this Bluebell house is. Woo! Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you wonderful people next time.